In the distant past, humanity was a name that inspired awe. When Earth first rose to join the Galactic Council, we were new, driven, and ready to stake our place among the stars. The Council, a conglomerate of the most advanced alien species, marveled at our rapid ascent. Our ships, our weapons, and most of all, our adaptability, caught their attention. We were welcomed, not out of kindness, but because they feared what would happen if we were not. At that time, the galaxy was in turmoil. Different factions constantly vied for dominance, and skirmishes were common. Humanity, despite its late arrival, made itself known. Our fleets fought alongside the most powerful council members. We won battles that others considered hopeless. Our tactics, a blend of audacity and precision, baffled our allies and enemies alike. There was no challenge too great, no obstacle too formidable. Our creativity, paired with our refusal to accept defeat, became legendary. But time changes everything. Humanity, having established its place, shifted priorities. Instead of expanding outward and focusing on dominance, we turned inward. We pursued peace, invested in science, and sought to better ourselves. Diplomatic ties became more valuable than military strength, and our fleets, once feared, were quietly docked, maintained but unused. The Council saw this as a sign. Over decades, their respect began to wane. Without the constant show of force, without the reminder of our potential, we were no longer regarded as equals. Humans were seen as passive, more interested in discussions than decisions, preferring philosophy over power. They began to push us to the sidelines, considering us irrelevant to the broader issues of the galaxy. At first, we didn't mind. We didn't need constant validation from the Council. We had already proven ourselves, and we were content with our progress. Our focus shifted toward enhancing life for our people, mastering technologies that others had overlooked, developing sciences that would benefit future generations. We were no longer the warriors of old but pioneers of a different kind. However, history has a way of repeating itself. The peace we had grown accustomed to was shattered by a new, unprecedented threat, the Rexel swarm. Unlike any other species the Council had encountered, the Rexel were relentless. They moved from system to system, devouring everything in their path. They were not interested in negotiations, nor did they care about the political structure that had kept the galaxy in balance for so long. The Council, arrogant in their self-assured superiority, believed they could handle it. After all, they had kept peace for centuries, and their fleets were formidable. But they soon realized that the Rexel were different. They weren't just another aggressive species looking for dominance. They were something far worse. Every encounter with the swarm ended the same way: annihilation. No survivors, no prisoners. The Council's best forces, their most advanced ships, were nothing more than a fleeting distraction to the swarm's relentless march. Desperation began to spread. As more systems fell, panic took root in the Council chambers. The very species that had once dismissed humanity were now scrambling to find a solution. Their fleets, scattered and demoralized, were no match for the swarm. One by one, their strongest worlds were being consumed, their defenses crumbling like sandcastles against a rising tide. It was only a matter of time before the Council realized that they needed help. And yet, even then, even in their darkest hour, they were reluctant to admit their mistake. In hushed whispers, a few Council members began to speak of humanity. They remembered the stories, the tales of human ingenuity, resilience, and determination. But those stories had become legends, myths of a bygone era. When one of the Council's more pragmatic members suggested reaching out to Earth, it was met with skepticism and ridicule. The humans? They sneered. What can they offer now? They've grown soft, content with their peace and their philosophies. But as more worlds fell and the swarm drew closer to the Council's core systems, the sneers faded. There were no more alternatives. And so, begrudgingly, a small delegation was sent to Earth. Their mission: to ask for help from a species they no longer respected, a species they had long since dismissed as irrelevant. What they found was not what they expected. The Rexel swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Their arrival was sudden, brutal, and without warning. They didn't negotiate. They didn't communicate. They simply appeared at the edges of known space and began consuming everything in their path. Entire systems fell before anyone knew what was happening. The first few encounters were dismissed as isolated incidents, small skirmishes in a distant part of the galaxy. But soon, it became clear, this was not a minor threat. This was an invasion. The Council mobilized their forces quickly, sending their most advanced fleets to intercept the swarm. They had faced invasions before, and their collective military might was considerable. But the Rexel were not like any other enemy. Their ships moved with a terrifying efficiency, almost organic in their precision. They would overwhelm defenses with sheer numbers, their fleets swarming like locusts, devouring everything in their path. No matter what tactics the Council forces employed, they were met with brutal, unrelenting resistance. World after world fell. Entire fleets were obliterated without a trace. Council generals, once confident in their superiority, were left reeling, scrambling to find a way to stem the tide. The Rexel's attacks were not just physical but psychological. They didn't leave survivors. They didn't even leave debris. Where the swarm passed, there was nothing left but silence. Systems that had once been bustling with life were now barren wastelands, devoid of any signs that life had ever existed there. In the council chambers, panic began to set in. The members, once so sure of their dominance, now found themselves on the defensive. Their finest tacticians, their most brilliant minds were at a loss. Every strategy they tried failed. The Rexel seemed to anticipate their every move. It was as if they knew exactly how the Council would respond, countering their tactics with brutal precision. Morale was plummeting. Reports of entire fleets being lost without a single shot fired in retaliation spread like wildfire. The galaxy was losing hope. As the swarm moved closer to the core systems, fear took hold. Even the Council's most fortified planets were at risk. Their greatest fleets, once the pride of their respective species, were being dismantled like toys. What had started as isolated incursions was now a full-scale invasion, and the Council had no answers. There were whispers of surrender, of negotiating terms with the Rexel, but it was clear they weren't interested in negotiations. They wanted one thing: total domination. In the face of this crisis, the Council was paralyzed. They were not used to being outmatched. For centuries, they had maintained peace and order in the galaxy, relying on their superior technology and collective power. But now, all of that was crumbling. Desperation drove them to consider options that would have been unthinkable only months before. Alliances with former enemies were proposed, but even those seemed futile. The Rexel didn't care about the political history of the galaxy. They were a force of nature, an unstoppable tide. It was in this atmosphere of growing despair that one voice dared to mention humanity. The council chambers fell silent when the suggestion was made. Humanity? The same species they had dismissed and sidelined for years? It seemed ridiculous. But the reality was that the council had no other options. Their fleets were in ruins. Their strongest worlds were on the verge of collapse. They needed help, and fast. The discussion about approaching humanity was heated. Some members scoffed at the idea, their pride too great to admit that they might need help from a species they considered inferior. Others, more pragmatic, pointed out that humanity had a history of surprising the galaxy, of overcoming insurmountable odds. But that was centuries ago, they argued. Humanity had become soft, too focused on peace and internal matters. They weren't the warriors they once were. But as more systems fell to the Rexel, the dissenters grew quieter. They couldn't deny the truth, they had no other options. And so, despite the lingering doubts and resentments, a delegation was assembled. Their mission was simple, yet unthinkable: travel to Earth and ask for humanity's help. The delegation was small, only a handful of council members, chosen for their diplomatic skills. As their ship left the core systems, there was a palpable tension in the air. No one wanted to admit it, but there was an unspoken understanding among the council: this was their last chance. If humanity refused, if they were truly as weak as the council had come to believe, then the galaxy was lost. The journey to Earth was long, giving the delegation plenty of time to reflect on the Council's history with humanity. They remembered the stories of human ingenuity and strength, of their ability to adapt and overcome challenges that seemed impossible. But those were just stories, right? Humanity had changed. They had retreated from the galactic stage, content to live in peace, disconnected from the struggles of the wider galaxy. As the delegation approached Earth, they were prepared for disappointment. They expected to find a planet focused on philosophy, science, and art, but little else. They expected to find a species that had grown complacent, too comfortable in their isolation to care about the galaxy's plight. But what they found was something entirely different. The delegation arrived at Earth, their expectations low, their hopes even lower. They had braced themselves for a disappointing encounter, fully prepared to meet a species that had long abandoned its former glory. As they descended through the atmosphere, passing over the sprawling cities below, the delegation's initial skepticism grew into something closer to disbelief. Earth was not the quiet, passive planet they had imagined. It was alive with activity, thriving in ways that defied everything they had been led to believe. Upon landing, the delegation was greeted by a small contingent of humans. They weren't the diplomats or philosophers the council members had anticipated, but soldiers. Their uniforms were sleek, their movements precise, and their faces showed none of the softness the council had expected from a species out of practice with war. There was no hesitation in their eyes, no sign of weakness. These were not the humans of myth and legend, these were something else entirely. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the reception they had prepared for. As they were escorted through the bustling streets, they saw glimpses of Earth's advancements, things the council had never thought possible. Hovering above the city were massive structures, ships, unlike anything they had ever seen. Their designs were unfamiliar, sleek and silent, radiating power. They were clearly built for war, but the delegation could sense there was more to them than just brute force. There was a precision, a subtlety in their construction that hinted at something far more advanced than the Council's own fleets. The humans led them to a central command facility, where they met with Earth's leaders. The Council delegation expected the usual pleasantries, the long-winded introductions that typically accompanied diplomatic missions. But the humans wasted no time. Their leader, a figure who exuded quiet confidence, cut straight to the point. "You're here because the Council is losing," the human leader said. "And now you've come to us for help." There was no arrogance in their tone, no sense of superiority. It was a simple statement of fact. The Council delegation, caught off guard, struggled to respond. They had prepared for this, of course. But standing here, in the presence of these humans, in a world that clearly had advanced far beyond what the Council had assumed, they felt their prepared words slipping away. The Council's script suddenly seemed meaningless, irrelevant. The human leader let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. "We know about the Rexel swarm. We've been monitoring the situation for some time." The delegation members exchanged looks of shock. How could humanity have known? They had been isolated from the galaxy for so long. How could they possibly be aware of the Council's struggles? The human leader, as if reading their thoughts, smiled slightly. "You think because we've stayed quiet, we've been blind. That's where you're wrong. We've been preparing for this for a long time. We've just chosen to keep our advancements to ourselves." The delegation was led into a war room, a massive space filled with holographic projections of battle maps, star charts, and detailed analytics. Earth's military, it seemed, had been quietly tracking the Rexel's movements for months, if not longer. They had watched from the sidelines as the Council's forces were obliterated, taking note of every weakness, every mistake. And yet, despite all this, humanity had not acted. They had stayed out of the fight, choosing instead to observe. The delegation couldn't understand it. "Why didn't you help us earlier?" one of the council members finally asked, unable to keep the frustration out of their voice. "You've seen the destruction the Rexel have caused. Why wait until now?" The human leader's expression hardened. "Because you pushed us aside. For years, the council ignored us, dismissed us. You took our peace for weakness. You assumed that because we didn't flaunt our power, we didn't have any. So we decided to let you handle it on your own. But now... They paused, letting the weight of their words settle. Now the Rexel are threatening our colonies. Our people. And we don't sit by when our own are in danger. It was a simple answer, but one that carried an undeniable truth. Humanity had never needed the Council's approval, never sought their validation. They had developed in their own way, on their own terms, and now, when the galaxy needed them most, they were prepared to act, not for the Council, but for themselves. The delegation stood in stunned silence as the humans continued to lay out their plans. Earth had built an armada, a fleet of ships far beyond anything the Council could have imagined. They had weapons capable of pinpoint strikes, able to disable entire Rexel fleets in moments. Their ground forces were equipped with advanced exosuits and cybernetic enhancements, making them faster, stronger, and deadlier than any other force in the galaxy. Humanity had not just been preparing, they had been perfecting. But even with all of this power, humanity had remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. That moment, it seemed, had now arrived. "We'll join the fight," the human leader said finally. "But understand this, we do it on our terms. We don't answer to the Council. We protect our own." The delegation had no choice but to accept. They had come to Earth expecting to plead for help from a weakened species, but instead, they found themselves standing before a force that had quietly surpassed them all. Humanity didn't need the Council's approval. They had no interest in saving the galaxy for glory or recognition. They were doing it for their survival, for their people. As the meeting ended and the delegation was escorted back to their ship, they couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over them. The humans were unlike anything they had expected. They had been underestimated for so long that the Council had forgotten what they were truly capable of. Now, the galaxy would remember. The Rexel swarm had no idea what was coming for them. While they had effortlessly torn through the galaxy's strongest defenses, humanity was a different story. As Earth's fleets mobilized, the sheer size and sophistication of their forces became apparent. The Armada, hidden for centuries, emerged from massive underground hangars and orbital facilities. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, blending cutting-edge technology with ruthless efficiency. These weren't just war machines, they were the product of centuries of preparation, designed for a threat exactly like the Rexel. The first encounter was swift and decisive. The Rexel, confident after their endless victories, moved to engage what they thought would be another inferior force. But humanity was prepared. Their ships didn't move with brute force like the Council's fleets had. Instead, they were precise, calculated, striking at the exact weak points in the Rexel formations. Within minutes, entire sections of the swarm's fleet were obliterated, leaving nothing but debris in the vast emptiness of space. The Council, watching from a safe distance, was in shock. They had never seen anything like it. The Rexel, who had crushed every defense the galaxy had thrown at them, were now being dismantled piece by piece. And humanity was doing it with an almost surgical efficiency. The Council had always believed their technology was the pinnacle of galactic advancement, but humanity's ships, their weapons, their tactics, everything was beyond anything the Council could have imagined. As the battle raged on, humanity didn't just defend, they pushed forward. They weren't content to merely stop the swarm's advance. They wanted to end it decisively. Human fleets tore through Rexel-controlled systems, striking at their core fleets and hive minds. The Rexel, for the first time since their invasion began, were on the defensive. Their relentless march across the galaxy had been halted, and now they were struggling to hold their ground. On the surface of the planets they had occupied, the swarm was met with another surprise. Humanity's ground forces were unlike anything the Rexel had encountered before. Human soldiers, equipped with advanced exosuits and cybernetic enhancements, moved with inhuman speed and precision. They didn't just fight, they hunted. Each strike was deliberate, every move calculated. The Rexel, used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer numbers, found themselves outmatched on every front. Humanity wasn't just winning, they were dominating. For the Council, it was a humbling experience. They had spent centuries assuming they were the galaxy's most advanced and powerful civilization. But watching humanity's effortless victory over an enemy that had nearly brought the Council to its knees, they realized just how wrong they had been. The arrogance that had once defined the Council was crumbling. They had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as irrelevant, and now they were witnessing the consequences of that mistake. When the final blow was struck and the Rexel swarm was shattered, the galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. Systems that had been on the brink of destruction were saved. Worlds that had been under siege for months were liberated. Humanity had done what the Council could not. They had turned back the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced, and they had done it without hesitation. But humanity's victory wasn't just a military one. It was a message, loud and clear, to the entire galaxy. The Council, once so quick to dismiss them, now had no choice but to acknowledge humanity's power. And humanity made sure that message was received. After the final battle, a transmission was sent out from Earth to the entire Council. The human leader, calm and composed, addressed them directly. "We've done what you couldn't. We've protected the galaxy, not for you, but for ourselves. You dismissed us, pushed us aside, and now you've seen what that mistake has cost you. Don't forget this." The message wasn't delivered with anger or arrogance. It was simple, matter-of-fact, but it hit with the weight of everything the Council had just witnessed. Humanity had no interest in ruling the galaxy, no desire for power or control. But they had made one thing very clear: they were not to be underestimated ever again. The Council's response was swift. They extended every courtesy to humanity, offering them a seat at the highest levels of galactic decision-making, ensuring they would never be sidelined again. But humanity, true to their nature, refused the offer. They didn't need the Council's approval or recognition. They had done what they needed to do, and now they were ready to return to their lives, to their own development. They had nothing to prove to anyone. But the galaxy had changed. Humanity's display of strength, their ability to wipe out the Rexel swarm when no one else could, had shifted the balance of power. Every species, every member of the Council, now knew that humanity was a force unlike any other. And while humanity might retreat back to their peaceful ways, everyone knew that if the galaxy ever faced another threat like the Rexel, humanity would be there. And this time, no one would dare question their power. As the last remnants of the Rexel were hunted down and destroyed, the Council members who had once scoffed at the idea of asking humanity for help were forced to admit their mistake. They had forgotten what humans were capable of. They had mistaken humanity's desire for peace as a sign of weakness. But now, with the Rexel crushed and the galaxy safe once again, there was no denying the truth. Humanity was stronger than ever. And the galaxy would never forget that again.